In this tutorial, I explain my calculator. The tutorial is split into two parts. In this part, I explain the main features. In the next part, I show how to extract the statistics from the game into the calculator using the UX enhancer. So in this tutorial, I want to start with why one would need such a calculator. The reason is if you build really large cities, then you need an overview in advance how many populations you have, how many factories of each kind you need. And this calculator gives you the opportunity to calculate all of this. If you open my calculator for the first time, you can choose which mode to see. So the simple mode will have many settings disabled. So it's very simple to use. You will only have houses. You will not need to take care about certain things, how population and number of houses interacts and stuff like that. Whereas in the complete view, you will have many options already pre-selected. So basically everything you'll need is already ongoing. For the remainder of this tutorial, we will use the complex session, where you have all settings available, but they are not activated from the beginning, but you will activate them step by step if you need them. You can change in which mode you are at any time. Now, what are the basic functions of this calculator? First of all, you can set dark mode here with this button. You also have a very large settings menu I will explain later on. For the beginning, you may have a look at these settings down here. So you can show the buildings with decimals, you can hide production, and you can hide the boost. So here you get the most simple view of this calculator, but we leave it to the default at the moment. Then, if you have any questions, just open the help and read some background information how the calculator works. In the download section, you can export and import your current configuration and download an application to extract the statistics. So that's for the second part of this tutorial. We now assume that we build 5,000 engineers. And it shows us all the buildings we require, up to the farm fields and the mines. Based on the demands of the population, the demands for intermediate product and end products are calculated. So you have all of them immediately shown. What you can immediately do is increase the productivity of factories. So once you've got energy, you can double the amount that's getting produced. And if you have got more items, you can further increase this. But keep in mind, also, even when you later on equip items, these do not increase the amount of productivity displayed here. You always have to calculate this manually and enter it. If you want to keep track of what you require of buildings and what you already have in your game, there's an option to highlight missing buildings, and this adds a counter for the buildings you already have. You can then count upwards. It also offers you an overview over this factory, where you can also adjust the number of existing buildings and see the overproduction once you have specified some buildings. Another possibility to boost production is using silos, tractor barns, or Palasteffekte. You can simply adjust them by clicking these icons, and you can see how the number of buildings reduces. In case of silos and tractor barns, the demand is also incorporated. So the tractor barns require oil and silos require grain, for example. If your population now grows, and let's say you have a very high amount of investors, if you do not want to produce all these goods, you can check production reduction, shown here. And if you scroll down, you have input fields to reduce the consumed amount. If you click here, you can select newspaper articles, for example, and apply it, or in other pages, you can find other effects that you can also apply. If you do not want to apply this to every need individually, you have a button here that shows all effects for this island, where you can select and deselect them and apply them for all needs, as done here. Now there are items to change the input of a factory or produce extra demands or goods. You can show these by checking the extra goods settings. This will display more information on each child. So in the upper part, you see extra demand that's added to the demand required on this island, and below that's the sum of these two values. Now we can, for example, equip coffee roaster with marker, and if we go to coffee beans, we see that we have an extra amount. We can apply this extra amount and we see the effect down here. Another possibility is our items that change the input to a factory. We can equip them and we now see that our further pendings no longer consumes steel. We see an overview over all the items that have effects here or that have extra goods here. So that's the second way compared to equipping the items in this factory dialog. Until now we had all buildings and population in one view, but we can also create additional islands if we click here and here. We start with the good old Goldfurt in the old world, and we also add Cape Trelawney, the island Crown Falls, and in the new world we add one island called Colony to have some islands to exchange goods between them. It displays our top 2 population tiers, including their amount, and the top 5 factories, so that you can quickly see what is the main product production on each of these islands. We now click here. We can navigate to the island, enter the amount of investors we want to sell here, and we now see that we can only build those factories that we can build in this region, while gold and pearls are not supported to build here. How do we get these goods now? We can create routes. Therefore, we have to check the option for trade routes and then go to the factory for which we want to import a good, for example, chocolate. So here we choose our colony, it automatically inserts the 10 we need here, and we then add this. We can also import goods from traders. The amount is automatically specified depending on how much they sell. Then we can click the apply button and we see that our destination island does not produce enough. So we go there, and so now go there, adjust the productivity and construct enough farms to fulfill the desire. There's one thing you have to be careful about, and this is when one product can be produced by several products, like for example for lumberjacks down here. If we then create a trade route, this trade route is attached to this factory. So if we start the trade route from our old world lumberjacks hut and want to import it from the new world, then we get a problem because we can't construct this building there. To fix this, we can say that we want to produce the wood by the new world lumberjacks hut, and then we can easily import it from our new world island. So that we do not always need to click the apply button, we can check this option which does this automatically. Now what we can also do is go to the new world and say how much we already produce there. So we assume that we produce a lot of coffee there, and then we export this to Crown Falls. So now when we specify that we have investors, we already see the import applied. And this is changed when we have more investors. Only if we have too many investors, if that's no longer sufficient, it will display as not being sufficient. And we now have the possibility to import the difference from our colony. Docklands introduced a new way to get goods, namely by the trader Captain Morris. So to activate trade contracts, we need to select this option here, and now we have a new possibility here Docklands. The principle is basically the same as for trade routes, but instead of a destination or a source island, you select a destination or source good. Of course, you cannot import all goods. So for some goods, you only have the option here to export them. And as you can see here, for some goods, for example beef, there are multiple factories that produce beef. So you need to specify which factory should produce this good. This is necessary because if you import a good, the calculator needs to know for which production building you need then more. So we now do the same for coffee. We first of all delete the normal trade route, now we import coffee. And for, let's say we use penny farthings as an export good. And we see now that we need a lot of penny farthings, namely 187 tons per minute. We can improve this by setting penny farthings higher in the export hierarchy. So we select the button up here and we select penny farthings and we put it at the highest level of the pyramid. And as we saw here, now the number of penny farthings we need decreased. So the calculator, when you change the export pyramid, will always fix the amount of imported goods. So that's coffee here. And it will also display how many tons you need per trade. This is infinity for the moment because we have a too low loading speed, so we would not be able to import 263 tons per minute at the moment. But if set this to the maximum trade amount we can achieve, which is 44 tons per second, we now see that we need a storage capacity of 6,600 tons to import and export all our goods. And you can now use these numbers here to enter them into your trade contracts and get the desired result of imported tons per minute. You may have heard of the term arbitrage. We now see how we can model this in the calculator. First of all, we need another island. We call this one support, and it's located also in Captreloni. And on this island here, we export dynamite and import penny farthings. And to see all the factories, we click on this symbol, and now we can search for bicycles. Here we have them, and we export them. Let's say on the other island we needed 93 tons per minute. Let's say we want to get 150, and we export dynamite. So here we said we want to import them and consequently export dynamite. Now we have a lack of dynamite. We fixed this by importing dynamite from the other island. Here it automatically shows how much we would need. And we export the superfluous bicycles to Captreloni ground faults. And of course we also need to set dynamite in the export pyramid. So now we have a lack of dynamite here, and we fixed this by exporting bicycles for dynamite. It's here. And if we now look into our overview, we see that we export here 160 tons of bicycles. We get coffee for it. We get 192 tons of dynamite. And these 192 tons of dynamite are then traded on the other island into bicycles. And what we get from there is more than the 75 tons we've required here, but these were the 150 tons. So we still have a minus of 10 tons of bicycles, but as we can see, by trading between these two islands, we get a plus of 80 tons of penny farthings, which we can use in the example here to get coffee. So how far can we get with this very simple type of arbitrage? Well, the limit is the amount of storage we have on these islands. And we now want to maximally use our storage. And therefore, there's a handy way to achieve this. This is this button here. So if we assume that we have 4,000 tons of storage, here we can set the total capacity. Of course, we need to set the fast trading rate. And if we then say that we have a storage of 4,000 tons, it tells us that we can trade 128 tons of dynamite to get 160 tons of penny farthings, which uses all of our storage capacity. So we need a trading amount of almost 1 minute, and this calculation already includes all the other factors of waiting time. So you have got these 20 minutes between two trades, and you have also the time Morris requires to reach your island and to leave the session again. And this time can vary between 2 minutes and almost 5 minutes. And to use a conservative average, I used 4 minutes. So I assume an amount of 24 minutes between trades plus the duration shown here to calculate how many tons per minute you can actually trade. Then the season 3 also introduced special new buildings in the public building section. So these buildings, they can be changed by selecting recipes. They consume goods, unlike many other public buildings, but they also provide bonuses. And to model all of this, there's this new interaction scheme here. So like in the game, you can select the recipe you want to use and click the add button, and this will generate one building. And you can of course use more buildings. This will increase the consumption of goods, and you can click supply effects, which applies the bonuses of this building to all residents on this island. You can check it here because it's reflected here, so it doesn't matter whether you use the button there or here, it's the same button. And if you no longer have any buildings of this kind, just that remove this effect and set the number to 0, then it will disappear and will be added to this recipe list again. So as we see, if you add another here, it's get removed from this list. And if we build all buildings of this type, the generic building will no longer be available. But with skyscrapers, things become a bit more difficult. If you open the population configuration dialog, you see a lot of numbers. To get this started with, I explain how consumption is calculated. So consumption is not based on the number of residents that actually live there, but on the number of residents that could live there. So that's the maximum residents number that you see in the houses and also in the statistics screen. So what we have here is the number of houses, which is 2,800, the number of residents that currently live on the island, and also per house. So if you change this number here, it will be reflected in the number of buildings, so that this times this gives this one. The same holds for the maximum number of residents, so that the number of buildings times the residents per house give this number. And this number must, of course, always be greater than this number. So if you do not fulfill all needs, this number here is lower than this number, but you still have the consumption of this number of residents. So when I introduce skyscrapers, I do not use the number of residents, but only the number of max residents. And for every level here, you can enter the number of houses, the number of residents that at a maximum can live in this type of building, and this gives you the number of residents per level of skyscraper. So for example, if we have level 5 skyscrapers, we have a population of 875 in these skyscrapers. If you now want to apply the panorama effect, you need to do this manually. For example, level 5 panorama effect gives 125 additional residents, which end up in 300 per house. And as you can see, the total number of population now changes. You can also change the number of houses, and all numbers are updated accordingly. And as you already see, there's a lot of dependencies between these numbers because certain equations need to be fulfilled. So for example, if you sum up all these values, you must end up with these values here. And if you sum up all houses here, you need to get this value up here. So if you change any of these values up here, which is not recommended once you've got investor skyscrapers, I need to ensure that somehow these sums are still match, and therefore I update the number of residences here if you change any of these numbers here. But to say again, it's not recommended. So once you have used skyscrapers, only use the values down here. Some speciality is the skyline tower, because there you have 1,500 population that you gain from store recipes, and these 1,500 do not consume anything. And this is already incorporated in my calculation. So if you have one skyline tower with a maximum of 4,000, which is the default, the consumption of these one skyline tower is only the 2,500 population, which is in line with how the game handles it. And one small remark regarding the needs. So you can check and uncheck them here. For consumption needs, this sets the demand to 0. And for public buildings, this only has an effect if this button down here is active, because then it calculates the amount of residents up here based on the number of goods you supply. This is only relevant if you're still ascending and have not yet all needs unlocked or not all of them supplied. Once you've got investors, you should not use this button anymore, and it's also automatically deactivated. And the stores, if you deselect them here, this has no influence on the stores here. So if you want to include the consumption from these stores, you have to additionally select them from here, and also check the supply effects if you want the bonuses to be applied.